The fourth of the 10 perfections is wisdom. Wisdom is such an important core structure in Buddhism that it's hard to understand it being listed fourth. In fact, this common way of listing an order that they list the 10 perfections in is really just for some sort of arrangement, for memory. There is some element to the order, but you can obviously see that wisdom feeds back and influences and characterizes all of the other perfections. In other words, you can't practice generosity properly without some degree of wisdom. You can't practice virtue without wisdom. You can't practice renunciation without wisdom. All of these other characteristics rely on wisdom as a core. What is wisdom? It's interesting to reflect on the difference between wisdom and intelligence. So does a person who writes an IQ test and gets 150 or 160 on it, are they wise? Not necessarily. In fact, people can do evil. They can be without conscience and get a high score on an IQ test, apparently. So what is wisdom versus intelligence? I often talk about this because there is a strong emphasis on the evaluation of intelligence in education systems. But there is no way to evaluate wisdom. Intelligence is the capacity to answer questions. So science and scientists have to be intelligent in the sense that they need to inquire and they need to formulate ways of answering questions. Even people in the arts answer questions. What is a suitable subject for a painting? What is the next feature in a piece of music? They have to intelligently understand these things. Wisdom is not simply being able to answer questions, but knowing what question is the important one. Let's take science in general. It is a project to simply gather information about reality, the way things work in the physical world and in the psychological dimension. All of these areas are legitimate scientific inquiries. But how does the scientist decide which subject they want to study? Which one gets priority? How can you decide which question is the most important? It's that faculty which is wisdom. For the Buddha, obviously the Buddha is intelligent. I'm quite impressed with him as a philosopher, as a logician, as a skillful psychologist. And however, what does he prioritize as the ultimate value? What question needs to be answered above all others? And he says, suffering and its causes. So his search is not merely the accumulation of knowledge. He, in fact, is deciding very clearly to not preoccupy himself with scientific questions. He preoccupies himself with only one question: what is the cause of suffering and how does it come to an end? And so that wisdom, if we're going to call anything wisdom, it has to be addressed to the alleviation of unnecessary suffering. The conclusion of the Buddha is also that all suffering is ultimately unnecessary. In the end, it can be done away with. It's not immediately something that you take a pill and it all goes away. The process towards it is conditioned. And so The Buddha has no notion that by some magic means everybody will cease from suffering except through the development of wisdom. And this is also essentially differentiates Buddhism from other teachings which allow the entrance of an external agency into the emotional structure to dissipate suffering. Buddhism is very strongly advocating that there is no external agency which can intervene and manifest wisdom. The voice of another is helpful. The voice of a Buddha, the voice of a teacher, the voice of Dhamma is helpful. But the receiver of that has to have some development, and in order to process that information, it's quite obvious that lots of good Dhamma, good advice, psychological advice is given, and it is not acted on by the one who hears. So it is the faculty of wisdom that hears and acts on good advice. So wisdom is, the simile for wisdom is the monk misses no house on alms round. This just generally means that one does not overlook all kinds of inquiries. I would say that this is the second factor in the 7 factors of enlightenment. It's called Dhamma Vichaya, investigation of Dhamma. That is the wisdom faculty. We see wisdom come up in other lists as well. For instance, the 5 spiritual faculties, which become 5 powers. Wisdom, panya, is the last of the 5. So in that grouping, we have faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. Wisdom is an absolute necessity in that it informs all of the other faculties, especially faith. So this Buddhism, again, is not a pure faith religion. It requires religious diligence and investigation and the development of psychological faculties. So there's no idea of a mass salvation through the intervention of an external agency. Each person must attain wisdom and enlightenment for themselves through their own efforts. Information can be shared, but one must internalize it and activate it on one's own. It's very critical. Also, when we have a summary of the path, the Noble Eightfold Path, we often summarize it as Sila, Samadhi, Panya. And Panya, wisdom, really refers to the last 2 elements of the Eightfold Path in their developed form. Mindfulness and Samadhi conspire together to produce wisdom. It's a beautiful saying. The Buddha says, if one is established in Sila, then Samadhi may arise. One who is established in Samadhi, there is no need to wish, may wisdom arise. Wisdom naturally rises and swells out of the establishment in Samadhi. By the way, this Samadhi that we're speaking of is Samma Samadhi, right concentration, not any concentration. And for it to be right concentration, it means that one already has a sense of right view. None of the factors of the Eightfold Path can be Samma, or right, if they are not informed by right view. And right view is a sense, at least an intellectual idea of the 4 Noble Truths, the nature of suffering and its causes, the ending of suffering and the way to the ending of suffering. So essentially, wisdom fulfills that. Wisdom loops back in the Eightfold Path. The path begins with wisdom with right view, and it ends with wisdom after the path factors have been fulfilled and the strength of mind has been developed to the state of concentration, which allows the mind to break through to a full liberating understanding of right view. Right view is only is fulfilled only when the mind has the strength to internalize it and for it to fulfill a liberation from suffering. It's an emotional liberation. So this is the absolute core parami or perfection of wisdom. Every other, when you reflect on it, the capacity even to do loving kindness requires wisdom. Certain people can do loving kindness for those who are close to them, who benefit them. Some people can do it for strangers who are neutral. But in order for it to develop and radiate loving kindness for all beings, including one's enemies, that requires an element of wisdom. So we can see that even loving kindness is not fully developed except by the wise person. Generosity is not fully developed. Patience, determination, energy, all of those things have to pair up with wisdom. And this pairing is also one of the ways that the commentaries which talk about these paramis analyze them. They pair them together in certain ways, and wisdom is essentially has to be paired with every other element. So we can't really isolate wisdom, and we can't really just simply have a list of the order of development. There's all of these recursive structures looking into reflecting and feeding back, loops that feed back on each other. Each of these paramis feed back on each other. And so we can never isolate any of these paramis, and wisdom, though, is the crown jewel of the paramis, though it is listed in the fourth position. Now, I've just touched on wisdom, and of course, whenever you hear talks on the Eightfold Path or the development of any of the other aspects of Dhamma, it all involves wisdom. So I won't try to treat it exhaustively, just a little indication of the importance and the element of wisdom, how it plays out in the 10 perfections.